with 2 front feet. Pam, do you want to say anything? No.
Hello, love you all. This is Corey's show.
This is Corey's show. All right, so just so you know, we have 2 people in the audience here. We have Jennifer, who has also now hooked herself up to her computer, and we have Pam. Well, we have 3. I'm sorry. We have Pam Atchison, and we have Rachel Rosenzweig, who's on our staff, who is the only one who knows how to work any of this. So I will be learning as I go. This is my first time hosting a Zoom meeting, and the pure pressure of also being recorded at the same time is almost more than I can bear. So here we go. I have laughed with Pam about her desire for me to do this particular workshop on essential board policies, because I just can't think of anything more boring on some levels. Unfortunately, it is something that as arts administrators, or not unfortunately, but as arts administrators, they become very critical parts of our lives. So I have tried to put together a package. You have all kinds of samples, and I also want to open up the discussion for others to say what they may or may not need, because there are needs in other organizations that we don't need. So for instance, I know that Linda and the museum in Homer need to develop an accession and deaccession policy for artwork. Well, we aren't a museum. We don't hold artwork. So the Arts Council itself doesn't need that policy, but others of you may. And we'll also share any fabulous ideas you may have about resources. Again, I have listed a few, but there may be, and no doubt there are gabillions of others. I will tell you that when we started developing our policies, and it was a volunteer who led that effort, very frankly, with me learning with her along the way, we went to the federal government, and she went onto websites there to find out what standard practice is. But I think there's a lot more information out there now, and some of it far more tailored to the type of organization you are, which may make it a whole lot easier. So just to begin with, I start with the fiduciary responsibility of the board. We talked about this. For those of you who were able to join us for the board development workshop that we did last year, but this is the essential and critical role of your board, but it also involves all of your staff, particularly all of you executive directors, but even not even, I don't mean it that way, Allison and anyone else who's fundraising, who's, interacting at a high level with the public, need to be aware of all these policies and are generally fall under them as well. So I have attached a very detailed, definition of fiduciary. But the bottom line is we are all here on behalf of an organization and to take care of the organization and its funding. And our funding comes from donors. It doesn't come from shareholders. It doesn't, I know some of us have some earned income streams, but it is our responsibility to make sure we use those funds and apply them in the ways that they were intended. And the rules around that, as we discussed last year, have gotten way more complex than they ever were when Jennifer and I started out in this business. She's laughing. I can assure you, and going through a couple of economic downturns, after each economic downturn, the rules get tighter. So a lot of the rules that we are dealing with now didn't exist before the huge economic downturn in 2008 and the economic crash then. But so just for those of you who deal with that or have to report to that, and if you write a grant, you absolutely have to report how your funds are being used. You can only use $1 once. You cannot use it more than once, and your auditors, if you get an audit or do some kind of financial compilation, will be checking for that. And it is how other arts organizations in our state have gotten in trouble. And a couple of them have died, and a couple of them have managed after a lot of hard work to come back. But it is because they were caught using dollars that were intended for project A, B, or C, and they were using it for D, E, and F. And that is not allowed. So that's a very specific example of a fiduciary responsibility, but the tentacles are long and complex. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. Happy to talk with someone about it afterwards, but I am assuming that all of you in some way present financial information and have to prepare it and get some sort of annual report. Is that correct? Can everyone shake their heads? Are we there? Catherine, I realize your group is so new, you may not at this point. So,
right, we're so new, we're exploring what we want to do.
Got it. Okay. Well, then I'm not going to belabor that, and I did. What? I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Got it. So, could you all hear Pam? No. All right. She's brought up a very specific example to the now moment, and many of us are getting emergency funding to either distribute to artists or arts organizations. And her point is that you can only use that dollar once. So if the Arts Council got $10,000 to distribute to artists, we have to show which artists we're distributing that money to, and we can't say another grant is paying for that artist. So $1 goes to one expense, they have to match, and they can only happen once. That makes sense? Yes? Yes? Okay. So there's a current example, and of course, it's very hard in this day and age. I'm sure there is a greater temptation not to be quite as careful because we all need dollars. But don't do it. That's all I'm going to say. Don't go down that path, and don't think I can take $1,000 today and I'll pay it back tomorrow. Because again, I can think of 2 organizations in the state of Louisiana in our recent lifetime that have paid a horrible price, because that's exactly what they did, and they didn't get it paid back by the end of their fiscal year, and it was caught. Okay. So policies. I started. For those of you who fill out a 990, the 990 itself asks, does your organization have a whole listing of policies? And I have listed them here. I mean, I tried to get rid of some of the governmental gobbledygook, but these are policies that they ask for. You do not directly get penalized if you say no to them, but they can raise a red flag if the IRS gives you 990, and for instance, you don't have a conflict of interest statement. That is a moment that's going to possibly make the IRS say, this could be a problem. So let me just quickly run down the policies that are listed. Does the organization have local chapters, branches, or affiliates? I'm thinking everyone here on our call that does not apply to. I think of United Way, when I think, but there are other examples. Has the organization provided a complete copy of this Form 990 to its board prior to submission? Well, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can do it online. You can do it a lot of different ways, which is what the Arts Council does. If a board member requests it, we let them know that it is happening, and if they wish to see it or the audit, they can. They absolutely can. A lot of them, this is not what they're on our board about. It's not their driving interest. But I'm going to get back to that later because we have a little bit of a different governing structure than perhaps many organizations. So our executive committee sees everything. And it is our executive committee that also acts as our finance committee. They have developed the trust of the board over time, so the board concentrates on programs, whereas the executive committee concentrates, among other things, on finances. Does the organization have a written conflict of interest policy? I have attached what Track has developed for you all to use, to adjust, to put your organization names in. And there are lots of different ways this can impact the board. I love to use the example of Bruce Allen, who is an artist, and Bruce sits on our executive committee. And yet he also frequently is an artist on projects that Track has commissioned him to do. So if the board is at the point of voting on whether or not we're going to go ahead with that project and pay these artists A, B, C, and D for a particular project, Bruce leaves the room. He recuses himself from the vote so that it never can be said that he influenced the vote in some way to his benefit. Make sense? And I'm sure you all can come up with examples that would impact your life. Jennifer, do you have any that you can just, or another example that you could think of in your world?
Our conflict of interest is actually in our bylaws. It's something that was added since I've been there, though. And the way we cover it is, for instance, we buy our insurance from one of our board members.
Good example. Okay. So again, that board member, I assume, doesn't vote when the insurance renewal comes up. I'm sorry, what am I doing?
The audio is breaking up.
So what am I supposed to do? All right, folks, I'm bringing Rachel over here, but we're not sure. Is audio still breaking up? It's the internet. Well, that's just grand.
Well, it's fine now, actually.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for keeping track of the chat. I haven't gotten this multitasking down quite yet. Okay. All right. Does everyone feel comfortable with the conflict of interest? Okay. Whistleblower policy. This is, we have a sample for you, but I forgot it until about midnight last night when my brain cells kicked in again. So we will be forwarding you our example of a whistleblower policy. This policy applies to both the board volunteers, I should say, any volunteer, any board member, but any volunteer and any staff member. And it gives a procedure for them to follow should they feel that there is something that they're very uncomfortable with going on, including after they've gone through a couple of other steps, if they are uncomfortable either going to the president of the board, or if they are uncomfortable as a staff member going to their supervisor or the executive director, we have a special liaison that they can go to confidentially. And that person has a skill set in human resources, and they decide if it needs to come to the attention of the executive committee. So again, there are several layers that lead to that, but they can skip all of them if they feel that uncomfortable and don't feel that they can talk to any of their supervisors. They can go to this special board liaison. Written document retention and destruction policy. I've attached it. There are all kinds of examples of this. Trust me, the federal government has multiple examples of it. We have become very conscious, I will say, of shredding materials that have to do with our donors and or our financials, just for their protection and our protection. But then there's also a lot of information that really your accounting and human resource personnel, whoever that is, and I realize it may all be one person, but whoever is handling those functions needs to be really aware of, because there's some things you have to keep forever, like contracts and employee contracts, and there are some things that you don't need to. So let's see. Did the process, so I'm still on what the questions that the policies that are asked for in your 990, okay? Did the organization have a process for determining the compensation of the organization CEO, other officers? And remember, these questions are stated in a way not just for nonprofits, so they're officers of corporations that get paid. So they're asking about those kinds of officers as well, not just our volunteer boards. Or key employees include a review and approval by independent persons, comparability data, and substantiation of decision. And now I know why Pam does reviews every year, because that's exactly what they're looking for. Why is this person, what is their position description? Has it changed? Has it grown? Has it whatever morphed into something new? And how does that justify the salary that is recommended? That's what they're looking for here. And lastly, did the organization invest in, contribute assets to, or participate in a joint venture with a taxable entity during the year? And this is all about protecting your tax exempt status. This doesn't apply to SHRAC. So frankly, we never developed, we knew this policy possibility was out there. We did not develop one. Does anyone on this Zoom call, had they felt the need to develop one? Okay. All right. Well then, on page 2 of your agenda, I go into just a list of other policies that can be considered. There is the repeat, if you will, of the conflict of interest, because I think that is critical. If it's one of the ones that I think every organization needs to have to protect themselves and to protect the people who are working for them, both staff and volunteers. Confidentiality policy. This is relatively new in SHRAC's world, but and by the way, there are examples of all of these are attached to your packet. We require it of staff and board, because invariably there are discussions about donors or other financial situations. We've switched some bank accounts this year. Well, there's a whole lot of conversation that leads up to that, and those conversations are confidential to this organization, and it's as much about confidentiality outside of the boardroom. So as one new board member said to us when getting his board orientation, he said, I don't discuss my board doings, any of my board doings with my wife. I mean, that's how sensitive it is suggested people have to be aware of all of that. A child protection policy. This is very, it may cover a whole bunch of, in fact, maybe all of the organizations that are participating now, but Heartbreak, my gosh, thousands and thousands of children come through and in a week. And so we have a child protection policy that covers workers working with children. We also do background checks on any artist or any other kind of teacher who is going to be working with children. Non-discrimination policy. We have given you ours, which has been updated several times, even in the time that I've been here. And I know that Pam has used the example with you all before of the Beard Foundation, which, you know, was the first foundation that I'm aware of in our town to say that don't even bother applying unless you have a discrimination policy that states you do not discriminate against sexual orientation. So again, my message to you all is do your research. You know, when you're applying for a grant, look at all the rules first. And by the way, they are changing in this very volatile time. Don't assume anything. Don't assume the timelines. Don't assume the rules are the same. But so that's a relatively new addition to a non-discrimination policy. Expense reimbursement policy. This was delivered because we have several staff that have access to a credit card. Now it may have a very modest balance on it, like $1,000, but when we're doing the Art Break Festival, when we're doing Christmas in the Sky, I mean, it's easy to run through that money really, really fast. So, but that means there are a lot of credit cards out and running around there. So our treasurer, very frankly, years ago said, well, we need to tighten this up a whole bunch. And this policy was developed. Again, all of these policies are attached to the packet that was emailed to you all last night. And if you didn't get it, we can get it to you, okay? This is our take on it. And that reimbursement policy defines how to use the credit card and how staff get repaid if by some chance they end up having an expense that is not on the credit card. And then there is a pretty intense review procedure in the office for all credit card charges. So one of the things I do every month is go through every single credit card charge on every single credit card we have. Think, if you will, Art Break and all the building that goes on and all of the supplies and art supplies. And I go through every single one of those receipts that have already been signed off on and approved by a director. And then I go through to make sure that that is indeed what was spent and then approve the credit card bill. So again, all of these layers of review aren't new since, frankly, the last, the 2008 economic downturn.
You said you do, but you didn't explain, this is a check and balance, because the accountant should not. Did I-
Oh, you know, I didn't say that. Okay,
Can you explain the two-part
sure.
process and also on check disbursement, since you're on it?
Yeah. Okay, Pam is making the discussion fuller and saying she wants me to tell you all that my review process is part of a check and balance system between the accounting department and me. So it's not that the accounting department doesn't need to go through all of this as well. It is that our auditors said we now need to make sure someone else is going through this as well. and that the person who is paying the bill, who is actually creating the check, is not the person who gets final approval on the bill. Does that make sense? Is that? Yeah, okay. Social media policy, we developed this. It's a very simple one. It probably could be way more complex, but we developed this just a few years ago when social media started taking over our lives, and how we do our business. Welcome to Zoom, everybody. An IT disaster recovery plan. All right, truth in lending here. I gave you all the cover to this. I am happy to give you the 20 pages behind it. I just thought I would spare us all a little bit in our inboxes. But I will also tell you that our board treasurer asked our computer company, our tech company, to develop this policy for us. So it is in a language that I surely do not understand, but it does go through many layers of disaster and who is responsible for making sure that there are backups and more backups should an IT disaster happen. And again, I am happy to send this off to anyone who wants it and feels like they'd love to read it. Or show it to their tech company. Yeah, we'd like you, I need one of these. And for those of you who are required by the state agreed upon procedures, those lovely new policies that many of us must follow, in addition to doing an audit, that is one of the questions they ask. It's a new question as of this past year. Do you have an IT disaster recovery plan? Other things which, you know, are kind of, can be called a procedure, H here, the annual authorization of the CEO to sign contracts. Every single year, our board votes to give Pam authorization for 1 year, one fiscal year, and our fiscal year is July 1 to June 30, to sign documents, contracts, etc., on behalf of the board. I strongly recommend it if you're not doing it already. So there is a regular conversation with the board about it, should there be any concerns, but also there's a recommitment and reconfirmation by the board that yes, the CEO, the executive director, whatever the title is, has authority to do this. There may be different limitations for you all. For Pam, and just as an example, she can sign contracts, but you can't sign checks. No staff person signs a check. That is all done by the board. Well, those are procedures that your board can look at and decide what they're most comfortable with. Document retention, we've covered that a little bit. The non-standard gift acceptance policy, this is a fun one. We have one, but you'll see it. I've attached our page document. I have never, ever had to invoke it here at SHRAC, but I will tell you, I have invoked it, didn't know I was invoking it at one of the symphonies I worked for when somebody wanted to donate a horse. I'm not lying, a horse. It was a stallion. Apparently it was worth a lot of money. I knew nothing. And that had to go through all kinds of board procedure because we didn't know what we were getting into, what the liabilities were, how do we feed a horse if we have a horse and we haven't sold it? So, I mean, you can imagine all the ins and outs. Our policy basically says if a situation like that comes up and it's a non-standard gift, that it goes to the executive committee and they'll all have to figure it out. Okay, so very, very simple. All right, those are policies that we have. I want to stop, and do you all have any others that you have found are particular to your situation? No. Okay. All righty. Please.
I know you can't hear me, but
Yeah.
you made it optional about signing checks and you explained that I don't. So I think that you should, I think that we should say there is a strong reason why directors should not sign checks or should only be one of two.
Two signatures.
On checks, and it's to protect the director.
Yes.
I just say that one.
Okay. Pam wanted me just to elaborate a little bit more about her not being able to sign checks, and what she's saying has certainly been the case in my entire nonprofit career, and that is whoever the CEO was of a nonprofit might be able to sign a check but was one of two signatures, or not be able to sign checks at all. And it really is for the protection of the CEO, so that there again is always someone else looking at those checks. Essentially with the signature, they are approving those checks. I know when we give checks to the few, there are about 5 executive committee members that can sign checks, and that gets reaffirmed every year also. That they are looking at all of the backup information to that check. So they see I've reviewed it and approved it. They see the director has reviewed and approved it, that it was part of a budget or it wasn't, it was a special need, whatever the situation is, but they get all of that backup material when they're signing checks.
Corey, ours is not quite that strict. We have 2 staff members that are signers, and we can sign a loan up to $1,000. At $1,000, there must be at least one board member's signature.
Okay, all right. Well, and now that I'm thinking back to it, long ago, far away, when I was with the symphony, I think I could sign checks up to $250, and it just needed one signature. But anything over that needed 2 signatures, and the other one could not be another staff person. Okay. Yeah.
We still have
Again,
something
it really
similar in
is
place,
about
Lori.
Allison.
We
What'd
still
you
have
say?
something similar in place.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So where do you go when you're trying to figure all of this out? And very frankly, if you're like me, get expert help from people who have already been through this and done this. And there are a lot of resources online. So I have listed 4 for you all that are all readily available. I will also say that depending upon which niche of the arts world you're in, you generally have overarching organizations. It used to be the American Symphony Orchestra, whatever. You know, there's the Americans for the Arts is very tailored towards arts councils, although they cover a lot of territory. So if you have overarching organizations like that I just may not deal with on a day-by-day basis, I would expect that they would have some wonderful resources, and they're going to be very specific to your needs. But I did list the Americans for the Arts, boardsource.org, wonderful resource. National Council of Nonprofits, at least one of the one of the policies that I've attached, we used sample, and I referenced them. I cited them, gave them credit for, we basically took their sample and added Shreveport Regional Arts Council to it and changed a couple of words to make it pertinent to us. The nonprofit expert, nonprofitexpert.com. And again, you may have other resources. I will say that the one, for those of you who may not have been there when we were trying to get all of these pieces working, we will be forwarding to you our sample of a whistleblower policy. It's the one I forgot. I went to Pam this morning of all the policies to forget. But anyway, so that whistleblower policy will be coming out to you all. Questions, thoughts?
How do you handle, for instance, bills that you pay online? Because they don't require it.
So did you all hear, well, Jennifer asked, how do you handle bills online? They print out for me. what the bill was, and if there's a confirmation of payment, and I sign off on that. Yeah, exactly. So they literally print it out, and our treasurer wants to see that. Anything that's paid online. So, I mean, for instance, we pay several of our insurance bills online, and these are significant bills. These are not $50. So she has now required, and again, this has evolved over time. It's only been in the last year that she has said, I need to see the backup of those just as I would for any hard bill that we get. Okay, okay.
I have a question or an observation. Would you talk for a moment about why sometimes the most important board member is the treasurer, and how the treasurer of the board can really keep you out of trouble if they have the credentials and the experience?
Yes. I agree with everything Pam just said. And okay, so I was just saying, talk a little bit about what the board treasurer is and how they can keep you out of trouble. This says my battery is rainbow, Rachel. Closed. What? Stop it, Rachel. Stop it. So, yes, I'm sure the answer to that is yes and yes. And y'all, I don't know about you, but I have been extremely impressed and grateful through the years for in all of the nonprofits that I worked with the dedication and time that particularly key volunteers put into any nonprofit organization. And I can assure you that our treasurer, I mean, she is the embodiment of living the fiduciary life on behalf of SHRAC. Her job and she sees it as such, is to cover SHRAC's back. She understands that Pam and I are not accountants. We are not CPAs. We don't know all the rules. We try and learn. We, try and keep up with our industry, but she takes that role very, very seriously. Sometimes to the point that Pam and I want to cry, but we are ever grateful the next morning when we're feeling better and we know that she has made sure that the Shreveport Regional Arts Council will exist tomorrow, which is her role and is the appropriate fiduciary role. So take care of your treasurers. Okay, let me continue. Thank you. So she said, don't elect a new one every year. Well, this gives me an opportunity to talk about Pam, our structure, SHRAC structure, governance structure a little bit, which is probably different than most. It is different than any of the others that I have worked with in my 40 years in the nonprofit world. We have an executive committee that owns the responsibility, and our bylaws define that they can own the responsibility to oversee all of our financials and legal issues and so on. It's not that they are not shared with the board. It is not that the board does not vote. It is that our board is a very program-oriented board. Most of our board members are on board because they love Art Break, or they love Art Space, or they love Christmas in the Sky. And that's what they are all about. But they have complete faith and trust in the executive committee. And when the executive committee says, we have reviewed this up one side and down the other, and here are our, we looked at these 3 recommendations, and this is what we are recommending to the board. Generally, the board goes along because they know that is exactly what the executive committee has done. And our bylaws state that our executive committee can act on behalf of the board, except for in the total sale of assets, okay, total sale of assets, or closing the organization down. Those two things are forbidden that they can act on behalf of the board. But other than that, they can act on behalf of the board. And our board members tend to be, as I say, way more involved in the program that they love. Okay, y'all, well, that's all my wisdom. You've got it all from me. If I can answer any questions, I am happy to do that. And again, did everyone, at least on the line, get the email packet with the agenda? Yes, okay, got it. And we, as I say, Rachel will be emailing to you all. Thank you, Amy. Rachel will be emailing to you all the whistleblower policy. And if that's it, then I am going to say goodbye to you all. Really and truly, for those of you who may not know, I retire as of this Friday, or at least my vacation time prior to final retirement starts this Friday. So I will miss you all and thank you all for being part of my life. Okay? See you later.
Bye. Bye. Corey.
Bye. Okay, now what do I do? Oh,
Again,
just
Corey.
whoa.
Corey.